Frightful Mountain, Chapter 12, page 136. There are three. At dawn the next day, Leon Longbridge wedged the wooden scrape into a fork in the sycamore tree and wired it in place. He climbed down and hurried to his car to watch what came next. Frightful was too broody to notice what was going on below her, but not 426. He sat on the bridge top in the cold dawn, watching Leon climb down from the tree, and John Wood grab the iron bough and climb toward him. When John was too close, 426 took off with a loud snap of his wings, climbed high, and dove at the man. John ducked and climbed on. Sam, in his lean-to, was also watching. "That ought to work," he said to himself. "The eggs are so close to hatching, she won't abandon them." Frightful snapped out of her trance when John Wood swung down to the horizontal girder. She got to her feet. "Hello, Destiny," he whispered. "I'd know you anywhere." Frightful recognized him. "See," she called, and stepped back over her eggs. He inched slowly toward her. 426 screamed the alarm of the peregrine. The penetrating call touched Frightful's survival instinct, and she flew off the eggs. The air was cold. John carefully wrapped the warm eggs in bubble plastic and lowered them onto a hot water bottle in his backpack. He shouldered the pack, grabbed the bow, swung up onto it, and backed down its curved slope to the bridge. Frightful flew back to her scrape. Her eggs were gone. "Cack, cack, cack," she cried. 426 answered her distress call and dropped down beside her. The empty nest stunned and confused them. Movement at the foot of the sycamore caught Frightful's eye, and she saw John Wood. She screamed and dove. He was the one who had taken her eggs. He saw her coming and covered her head with his hands. A talon scraped him. Quickly he scaled the tree to the artificial scrape, and fending off Frightful with one arm, he gently laid the eggs in the box. He climbed down, ran across the bridge, and joined Leon Longbridge in his car. Frightful circled and swooped to a limb in the sycamore tree. 426 joined her. Sam watched. Leon and John watched. Minutes passed. The air was cool. Frightful flew from the tree back to the bridge. She circled once and flew back to the tree. She cried her worried call. 426 answered. Agitated, he flew over the town. Frightful followed him. An hour passed. The pair did not come back. "Okay," said John Wood. "This isn't working. The eggs have been uncovered for 60 minutes, and at 45 degrees Fahrenheit, that's not good. I'm going to put them back." He climbed to the box, wrapped up the eggs once more, and returned them to the scrape on the bridge. He was backing away when Frightful lit on the girder and, putting one foot in front of the other, ran to the eggs. She sat down and pressed her brood patch against them. She stood up. The eggs were cold. She sat down again. An hour later, she got up and walked away. The chicks in the shells had not moved. She walked back, turned, and snuggled them against her brood patch. She called wistfully. Dave Martin arrived early for work. He looked up at the gray-blue sky and put on his rain gear. Seeing Leon Longbridge and John Wood, he asked about the falcons. John told him they had tried unsuccessfully to move the eggs. "We've got to somehow postpone the bridge painting," John said. "I guess there is nothing you can do. I'll try calling Albany again." The rain was beginning to fall when Joe Cassini arrived. Dan Martin greeted him as he got out of his car. "We can't paint today," he said. Bad rainstorm coming." "We can sandblast," Joe Cassini said. "Is there any reason why we can't start cleaning up rust spots in the rain?" "No," said Dan Martin. "Rain shouldn't make any difference." Then Joe Cassini turned to Dan and put his head on his shoulder. "When we get to the webs," he said, "I want you to paint the ones near the nest. You seem to know something about peregrine falcons. Enough to ask this. Do we still have to go ahead with the work? The bridge won't fall down now." "We still have to go ahead," Joe Cassini said. "I checked with Albany myself. The governor is relentless. Said the tourists were beginning to come to the Catskills and he wants the work done on time." "I've just been talking to Leon Longbridge and John Wood," Dan Martin said. "They tried to move the eggs to another site this morning." "Yeah?" "It didn't work. They had to put them back before they froze." Joe Cassini glanced at the eyrie. "Funny," he said. "But I like those birds. They're real spunky." 2 hours later, when Frightful again turned her eggs, there was still no movement. 426 arrived with a pigeon. He pulled off a morsel to feed Frightful. The sandblasting machine started up. 426 dove onto his wings and sped away. Sam left his lean-to and walked partway down the mountain. Frightful had not eaten for 11 hours. The high-pitched noise of the sanders had driven 426 away. The Tearsall, he knew, wouldn't come back until the workers went home. And that was too late. Frightful had to be fed, but how? The crewmen were all over the bridge, hanging work platforms and blasting rust. There was no way he could climb to the eyrie without being seen, and he did not want to be seen. Not now. He had worked with Frightful for 2 weeks, and he didn't want to be stopped. Best to keep out of sight. He was known in Delhi to a few people: Miss Turner, the librarian, Leon Longbridge, and some of the kids. They referred to him as Thoreau, the boy who lived on Peaks Brook Mountain. That was just fine. But climbing a bridge made him obvious, and that was something Sam didn't want. Just before noon, the rain poured down in torrents. The crew got into their cars or ran to the cafe. Sam's deerskin jacket repelled water like a nor'easter coat. He lifted his binoculars. Frightful was off the eggs. She was standing on the food 426 had brought, eating heartily. When she was satisfied, she brooded again. "She must have brought the eggs back to temperature," he said, "even in this rain. What a noble bird." Sam walked down the mountain, crossed the river on rocks, and took the long trail to his hemlock tree. He lit a fire in his fireplace and stretched out on his bed. 4 or 5 more days, he said. I wonder what else can happen. At that moment, Frightful felt the chicks move vigorously inside their shells. A burst of rain struck the bow and rushed down the vertical webs. Water spilled on her. She sat calmly, attent over her precious eggs. Day 29 dawned cold. A snow flurry powdered the mountains and dropped white crystals on the town. Frightful cocked her head and stood up. One egg was vibrating. Inside, the chick's neck was twitching spasmodically when its little body stiffened. A sharp egg tooth on the top of its beak pierced the inner membrane, and its nostrils pushed into the pocket of air at the top of the egg. The chick's lungs filled. It breathed. Cheep! Frightful lifted her body so that she had very little weight on the hatching chick. Her warm feathers fell around it. As the chick breathed, the oxygen inside the egg was replaced by the chick's carbon dioxide. The gas twitched her muscles. The head wobbled. The body stiffened. A fragment of shell lifted and fresh air rushed in. The chick lay still. Hours passed. The other 2 chicks went through the same ordered sequence of hatching. Each step was vital to their safe entrance into the world. After struggling another day, the first chick cut a larger hole and thrust her beak and egg tooth into the air. She breathed freely. She rested, letting her lungs become fully functional. While she was quiet, Frightful stepped off the eggs, and 426 stood over them. On day 31, the chicks' heads were circling inside their shells, cutting through them. The sandblasters screamed below. Work platforms clanged in the wind. Frightful and 426 heard nothing. They were hatching the chicks. The little female cut through 2/3 of the shell top, then pushed the cap with her shoulders. It popped open. She stuck her head out. A cherry picker rolled out onto the bridge and lifted Dan Martin to the top of the bow. He sanded the rust by hand, checking to make sure he wasn't disturbing the peregrines. Frightful was on the nest, her feathers draped around the hatching chicks. Once her head was out, the first chick, a wet little female, easily kicked herself free of the shell. A peregrine falcon was born. She was Oakski, the wide-eyed. Frightful let her feathers fall over Oakski while the little bird rested from her great struggle. 426 perched quietly by. In about